Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Sarah Beck. I'm the Executive Director of Pacific Horticulture. So you know you are in the right place. This is Pacific Horticulture's book launch party with photographer Caitlin Atkinson and writer Jennifer Jewell on their new book, Under Western Skies, Visionary Gardens from the Rocky Mountains to the Pacific Coast. Joining me is Pacific Horticulture's board chair, Richard Hayden. So good to see you, Richard.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. This is super exciting to be actually launching this book on the official date that it launches to the public. And we're really honored at Pacific Horticulture to have this opportunity to bring these incredible artists and writers to our audience. And also, this book is just such alignment with our mission here at Pacific Horticulture. So I'm excited for everybody to get a chance to see it.
Now, this is going to be an actual party because today is the actual day of launch. No one, actually, I can't say no one because I do have a physical copy of this book right here. And I have to say it is quite hefty. It's really impressive. It's very big. It's very satisfying. And I know you're all very jealous because you're probably still pre-ordering. But you will have yours soon, hopefully. And I think, Richard, let's go ahead and start introducing our guests today.
Let's do that. I just want to mention that Noah has popped the information for ordering this book in the chat window. And as Pacific Horticulture members, you get a 35% discount from
Timber Press Workman. Yes.
And that there also are signed copies available, for instance, at Mrs. Dalloway's in Berkeley and maybe your local bookstore, which we like to certainly support. So think about that as well. Let me start out by introducing the photographer, Caitlin Atkinson. Caitlin is a photographer of places, spaces, and all things botanical. She's the author and photograph of the book Plant Craft, 30 Projects That Add Natural Style to Your Home, published in 2014. And she's the photographer of 3 other botanically focused books, which are all great, which we'll go into. And Caitlin's work has appeared in such publications including Dwell, Martha Stewart Living, Better Homes and Gardens, Harper's Bazaar, Sunset Magazine, and Architectural Digest, to name just a few. And when she's not busy photographing gardens, you can find her digging in her own patch of dirt. Just to give you a little background on her thinking for the book, she conceived it, she says, as the thought of the book is an expression of love of the place that she calls home. She says, I wanted to capture real gardens and the stories of the people inspired by and deeply connected to our place on this earth. This book is of the places and people that make up the West, but it is the story of gardeners and people everywhere.
So speaking of her writing for this book, Jennifer Jewell says, and this is a nice quote, I'm particularly interested in the intersections between our gardens, the more wild natural spaces beyond our gardens from which our gardens were carved. Thoughtful and intentional gardeners help to address challenges as wide-ranging as climate change, habitat loss, cultural polarization, and social justice, and individual and communal health and well-being. Jennifer is a gardener, garden writer, and gardening educator and advocate. She is the host of the national award-winning public radio program and podcast, Cultivating Place, Conversations on Natural History and Human Impulse to Garden. Yay. She formerly served as native plant garden curator for Gateway Science Museum at California State University, Chico. Her book, The Earth in Her Hands, 75 Extraordinary Women Working in the World of Plants, was published in 2020. And I know many of you are familiar with that book as well. Very notable to us, Jennifer is a former board member of Pacific Horticulture.
Yes, we certainly appreciate that. And let's welcome Caitlin and Jennifer to our little party. Hey, guys.
Hi.
How are you?
So excited to be here. That's how I am. Woo!
Oh, great.
So good to see you.
We're so excited too. And we're very honored at Pacific Horticulture to be thought, hey, Caitlin, hello there. We were chatting earlier. We all are so impressed by Caitlin's flower arrangement of Vermontodendron. It's just beautiful. And before we get going, I think it's time to start the party. I want to propose a toast. to
Absolutely.
your beautiful book, which is going to be such an inspiration for us Pacific gardeners. And I wish you guys much success, and thank you so much for allowing us to be part of it. Cheers.
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 Oh, thank you.
Yummy. Let's dive right in. We're going to obviously see some pictures and share some of the sneak peeks and behind the scenes of how the book got created. But I wanted to start with, I think it's always great to understand people's inspiration and how they came to a project. And so I was going to ask Caitlin to give us a little background information about what your inspiration was for writing this book.
Yeah, well, your introduction definitely helped start that conversation. And so my inspiration really came from growing up in the West and feeling a really strong connection to this place and feeling like there wasn't really a book that kind of represented our place here. And because a lot of books are more oriented towards East Coast where they have rain all year, and there's so much beauty in our kind of seasonal dry hills, and there's so much we can do here with the plants that are actually in our native landscapes and bringing them into the garden and kind of really having, if you're in a space that has a connection to the wild space, having that connection between the wild space and your garden and kind of merging the two and kind of building a deeper relationship with that space. And also in an urban setting, that can mean something really different because there's the layers of cultural history and neighborhood activity and plants that have come before with different people who have come through that city. And so there's a lot of different layers to it, but essentially I wanted just a book about the connection to place. And I wanted it about real gardeners that were actually digging in the earth and really investing their soul in their gardens and that kind of relationship to place coming through. And it didn't mean that we weren't going to feature, community gardens and public spaces, because I think those are equally important. And they're especially important if you rent or if you don't actually have any space or you aren't familiar
Right.
with gardening. But I really definitely wanted to emphasize people who really had some connection to place and gardens that really meant something to them.
Thank you. That's a beautiful thought. And I love this slide. I love seeing
Me too.
these people that created these gardens, And Jennifer, you do such a great job with your podcast on bringing the story of people and their gardens to life. How did you choose which gardens to include in this project? It couldn't have been easy.
It was not easy because you could have chosen so many more, and there are just so many great gardeners out there putting some of these concepts and kind of tenets of faith into action in their own gardens across the West right now, that there could have been many more, but we really tried to choose sort of 4 to 5 to 6 gardens in each of the major subsections of what we as Americans consider the US West. So the Southwest, we split California into Southern California and Northern California, and then the Pacific Northwest, and then the Intermountain West. And when Caitlin and Timber Press came to me and asked if I would be interested in being the writer on the project with Caitlin, I was just really still in the hangover mode, having turned in The Earth in Her Hands. And I was like, well, but then when I heard Caitlin's and read her initial pitch to Timber, I was like, nope, this is it. I am in, because it really rounds out my whole premise with Cultivating Place, that gardens are not anything without people, and our world needs our gardens to be more integrated with that wider world as well. And one of the reasons I started Cultivating Place was this kind of bizarre, I don't know, bias to the way gardens are represented in mainstream media, and that when you're really only using the two-dimensional visual image, we often are just overwhelmed by pictures of gardens in like England. And when you have a picture of a garden in England held up to you over and over and over and over again as the standard of beauty, but you live in a place like this picture that we're looking at now, which is the TAC Retreat Center, which is the Thomas the Apostle Retreat Center, part of the Episcopal Diocese in Wyoming. You can't meet that standard of beauty that is being held up to you in the mainstream media without actually harming the place that you live. And that was a really important disconnect for me. And so Caitlin, certainly had a healthy handful of gardens she was already interested in. And then to flesh out the book, we kind of just put our two networks and contacts together. Hers really well integrated in the design and build kind of world, and mine pretty well integrated with the home garden world. And we said, okay, who do we know here? And we reached out to everybody, and like that fantastic gardener network you experience when you travel, people were like, oh, you got to see this one, you got to meet this person. And so there was this wonderful like influx of gardens we knew, but then also like total surprises to us. So I reached out to Paniotti at the Denver Botanic Garden, and he put us in touch with this beautiful garden at the Thomas the Apostle Center, which was really the passion project of the caretaker at the center, Jay Moody. And I think Jay is with us today. I hope he is. He said he thought he could make it. And we were really just blown away by people's generosity and their creativity and this range of really interesting gardens across this region that we thought would be really inspiring to people. And so some of the criteria included, we wanted public and private. We wanted small and large. We wanted do it yourself so that people could look at it and say, I could do that, as opposed to looking at it and being like, well, that's nice. If you have $1 billion and someone else is keeping your garden for you. But there are some, very nice, well-funded gardens, and all of them are beloved gardens by the people who work in them, no matter how much help or design work they've had be part of their garden project. The final criteria that I would add, and maybe Caitlin can add to this, is that we really didn't want to include gardens that had already been really well published and fleshed out in the garden publication world. So like you aren't going to see the Denver Botanic Garden here. You aren't going to see Lotus Land. You aren't going to see Ruth Bancroft's beautiful garden in Walnut Creek, because they're so well known by the garden world at this point already.
Sweet. Yeah. And I know, Caitlin, one of the interesting things I find about the West is so known for its light, for its golden light, and also for its really, really harsh days. I've been in a few gardens in my life and taken a few photographs, and it's so hard. What was your strategy for kind of capturing that feeling of the West, but still not, shooting at noon when everything was going to be so flat?
Yeah, always especially in California, but all over the West, you kind of have to roll with the weather. Whereas in the Midwest and on the East Coast, you have that soft humidity. And so you often end up shooting at dawn and dusk. We're looking at the Marwin Garden, which is in Watsonville in the hills. And that I shot in the late afternoon, evening, and often in the afternoon, evening, and this is Dawn Gardens in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada and Grass Valley, California. And in the afternoon, a lot of particulate matter kind of builds up throughout the day. And so you get a longer softening of the light. And then in the morning, on the coast, like this is Hog Hill and Sebastopol. And you can get that, particulate matter in terms of fog, which isn't really quite the same thing. So you can kind of catch that in between moment when there's this delicate glowing light. And also, so if you shoot in the morning when there isn't fog, it's pretty quick. You get a really nice, beautiful light. I mean, it could be more magical in some ways, but it's super quick. So you just have to be ready to go and kind of just go with the light, as a, like, you can't be like, I'm going to get exactly this shot. You kind of have to be like, I'm going to get what the light gives me. And so you're looking at this space and you're kind of trying to capture this space and whatever the gardener is doing in terms of form and color and structure of the garden, but you're also kind of following the light more than anything. I think at both times, you're following the light. You're not kind of forming the picture based on what you think it should be. You're forming it based on what it is as you experience it.
And you're burning the candle at both ends, probably.
I was just going to make a joke about that.
Yeah.
But you're a very early riser, clearly, as well. So very impressive.
You end up with very long days.
Oh, gosh. Jennifer, I want to bring in the people part of this conversation a little bit right now, because I really was fascinated by the narrative arc of the way that in each of the garden stories, you capture the story of place, and you capture the story of, obviously, the plants, which are fantastic. But I'm curious about how you told the story of the people, and just whether these three things, were already in your mind as sort of equal stories at the beginning, or how this evolved as your style.
Well, it definitely evolved, but and Caitlin and our acquiring editor at Timber, Stacy Lawrence, went back and forth a little bit, and and at first I think I turned in something on the first sort of sample idea, and we were all a little bit like, I don't know. And then I decided to go into a profile sort of in the middle of the book and put it together, and it really kind of worked for me in terms of meeting my own mission criteria, which is, the marriage of these things, the people, the place, and then how they come together in this space called the garden. And, I would say, and I say this whenever I speak, that all gardens are this interweaving of the place they're built, the people who are building or creating or living with them, and the history of that place culturally. Sometimes, for instance, you look down my little suburban cul-de-sac street here. It's not really cul-de-sac, but I look down a street, and, for the most part, you can't tell where these gardens are located. If you took a picture, you would say, I don't know where that is. And that tells you something in and of itself, that you cannot recognize the location in a general broad way of that garden. And so these gardens all have this just beautiful story that's visible in this, intensely insightful photography by Caitlin. Like, you can read a narrative in this image right here of exactly where this garden is located based on the plants that are thriving here, the light, the stone, the style. But you also get a sense of the people who brought it together to create this style. So in that way, you never have a formulaic garden, because all three of these things come together in this, kind of divine alchemy of what each person's recipe and formula are going to result in. And that's what makes a garden magical, right? We do not want replica after replica of any one garden. We want to feel that sense of human touch and, marriage, for lack of a better word, with the animals and plants and climate that they're sitting in. Like, to me, those are the very best gardens. And I think they resonate with most gardeners too. And it's really, this is what I do on Cultivating Place, but to have this come to life with photographs by Caitlin is just, fantastic.
Well, and you're so good at also getting at the inspirational spark of a lot of these gardens. And we're looking here at the Natural History Museum, the Nature Gardens at the Natural History Museum.
Right, sorry, I should have said that, yeah.
No, that's okay. I, in Los Angeles County, in full disclosure, I was the head gardener when this garden was first developed for 5 years of the natural history. And in your telling of this story and interviewing the entomologist and these people that were part of this was an asphalt parking lot originally, right. And it was turned into a wildlife habitat garden where scientists from the museum are studying urban nature. but I learned things from your writing that I didn't know about this garden.
Now I'd
So
love
that
to,
was,
I want to pop in here and admit I just give an accountability statement here, is that for anybody that is holding the book, it is a big book. It is a dense book. I was supposed to turn in 30,000 words. I turned in 90,000 words, and they graciously cut it to 60. But so there are going to be errors, and at least one error that I know of is visible in this picture. And that is that the attribution of that beautiful organic willow structure you see over on the side of your screen is misattributed in the book, and it should be attributed to the artist David Lovejoy. We are already going into a second printing. And so I very much hope that that will be corrected in the second printing, but my apologies, deep apologies to David, and beautiful willow structure with a child running towards it.
thank you. Yeah, it's that's a lot of words. Richard Turner is joining us.
Aren't you
Welcome,
glad
Richard.
you didn't have to edit them, Richard?
I know, former editor of Pacific Horticulture. This, I know this garden so well, and Caitlin, I have to say that I know all of these views, but you've chosen things and you've chosen light that I find so extraordinary. Was this a difficult garden to kind of choose what you were going to photograph? There's so much going on sometimes.
Yeah, well, I went in the afternoon, and I was glad I did, because I was able to capture people in it, which I thought was really important. And
I love that.
It does have, it does have this distinctive play area for children, which I think is super important. And actually the whole entire garden, I think you can go into without actually purchasing a ticket to the museum, which is wonderful for the
part of it you can, yeah. Part of it you need a ticket for.
Yeah. So I think that's great. And so there's a lot of areas for actually the children to play in and to actually like experience nature, which I think is so important in a city. So I definitely wanted to capture that. And I also wanted to capture the areas that offered native habitat. And then I also definitely wanted to capture the pollinator meadow with native plants, which is beautiful. And it wasn't really a hard garden to capture, but it definitely had distinctive areas in a sense, because it has that initial walkthrough that we saw that has the crevice rock wall with it, which is far more formal in terms of its structure. And I wanted everybody to kind of experience all these different little sections and at least feel like maybe you'd seen some parts of it, and definitely have that feeling of interacting within it, because it's definitely a bitty, like a city garden that's active, and it's also outside of a museum. So there's just a lot of activity, and it's kind of buzzing with activity, both wildlife activity and human activity.
Right. In this picture alone, if you turned around, you'd see busy Exposition Boulevard and the Expo Line light rail. It's all just right there, but you turn one way and it feels like you've captured here, like this just really magical moment. This is going so much fun to chat with you, but we need to get going. We've got a lot of gardens to see. So
well,
what's next?
let's look at a private garden. I think it's interesting. This public space conversation really is echoed also in some of the private home landscapes that you feature. This dynamic between cultural sensitivity and ecology. David Godshall's Edendale Garden is what you're looking at right here. And I loved the description of how he talks about using mostly California native plants and sometimes mixing native and non-native plants. But he also talks about the Latinx neighborhood influence and just how that can have an aspect of the interplay of making plant selections. So Jennifer, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about whether this came up a lot, this idea of sort of the cultural sensitivity of a place and mixing that with plant choices.
I would say it came up maybe 60-70% of the time. It didn't always come up.
What
was interesting is that, so and you could see this in the gardens at the Natural History Museum of LA as well, is that there's only one garden in the whole book that is purely native plants. and the rest of them are a sort of combination of native, non-native. And in many cases, like David and the Natural History Museum of LA, they made a very conscious decision not to pull out non-native plants that had been there a long time and that had a history in the places where they were. And I remember when I was interviewing the Natural History Museum folks, they said it really helped to orient visitors to the garden to see plants they were familiar with as well as those they weren't familiar with. And that in showing them the native plants and being able to label native, introduced, history here, you can see this in the outside, they actually were helping people to become familiar with the wild native plants so that when they met them in the true wild, when and if they did, they actually felt some level of comfort with them and could recognize them for who they were, those plants. And David has one of the best quotes in the book here, which was, in this view, you're looking from his garden towards his entry gate, and then on the other side of that gate, you kind of go down a little slope to the street. And this tree here, which I believe is a jacaranda tree.
Yeah.
If I'm wrong, okay, because there are a lot of pictures and plants. But he said to have pulled this mature tree out of his garden, and I believe he's here, so if I get this wrong, he'll tell me, would be an act of arrogance born of religious or like zealotry or puritanical, puritanism that would have been detrimental to the garden. And I loved that balancing of, it's an and also, it's not an either or. And I think that level of nuance and just personal comfort and conversation with your garden and the history of your place is really important as our gardens move forward, because they are about people as much as they are about place, and to make people and plants and wildlife welcome is important. It's going to be important. It is already important. So, and this is some more of, and you see that right there, like this is a garden that was built for a family. And these are little people who are growing up with this sense of wildness and plant love. And you can't ask for a better childhood than that. And he's right in the city. And that is, you can do this even with small spaces. And that is admirable.
So beautiful. Found objects.
Really nice.
I hope that answered your question.
Absolutely, it did. Oh, thank you.
So I think, speaking of a mix of natives and non-natives, I think our next garden is taking that to
extremes.
The maximum. This is I think the Taft Garden in Ojai, California, which is about 90 miles northwest of Los Angeles. Caitlin, can you tell us a little bit about this garden and its peculiarities and how you came to capture this?
Yeah, so it's pretty far out in, I mean, it's not heavily residential, but you travel through the hills of Ojai and you travel, down a long road through the hills, and then you go through an actual creek and stream, and then you're on a road under, the cover of oaks, and then you arrive to a small botanical garden, but it's within a larger nature preserve. So they have a larger property, but it's pretty incredible because you're surrounded by all these mountains and hills, and then within the garden, it's all covered in the oaks. So in a way, like the heart and soul of the place is, for me, it's like the hills and the oaks. But then within the actual garden, John Taft, who was an avid birder and plant collector, has a large collection of South African and Australian plants, which are climate appropriate, but they aren't he doesn't intermix natives with this. He does have natives directly outside of his garden, but the actual garden area is primarily non-native Australian and South African plants. So it's kind of this epic setting, and it's pretty amazing. And there was some, like, I had some, I don't know, I wasn't sure about it, because I know in general, like I am leaning towards that kind of mix of native, non-native, and kind of definitely, I think gardening in general is tending toward that trend. But I think the history of gardening in and of itself is based in plant collecting, and also in, like, a garden is this immediate area around a house that is actually a highly cultivated area. And so there is something to allowing our perspective to not just be, it has to be this or it has to be that. And
Right.
I think it is respectful of the land, but it definitely is not a strictly native garden.
Yeah.
As you can see here.
Right. Yeah, lots of aloes. It is sweeps and sweeps and sweeps of plants. The South African section and the Australian section are really quite large, and you don't see often that kind of massing of these kind of really sculptural and unusual plants. But you're right, the oaks are amazing. So it does all kind of interplay. And your photographs, of course, are great, getting those mountains in the background.
Really nice dramatic contrast. I'd like to have you move to another garden that actually has a very similar concept, but a completely different aesthetic. And I think this is a really interesting juxtaposition because the Hog Hill garden in Sebastopol, which you already had a tiny view of, this is another story of people over time, connecting with collecting plants and making lots of connections with people through that. And it also, just the way you photograph these, Caitlin, they're so painterly. I'm curious just about how that was achieved. And I just wonder how that space feels compared to being in Taft Gardens. I mean, it must feel like just a completely different world.
It does. I would love to take credit for the painterly quality of the garden, but I think it really was Mary Reed, who actually is a painter, but she also was a garden designer and studied garden design. And so she does these giant kind of swaths of color and texture that kind of really create this soft, gentle form throughout the garden. And so I would love to take credit for that, but it does feel incredibly
You can take a little credit for that.
It does feel so different, because getting there, it's in Sebastopol County, but it's kind of far out. And so you drive down a gravel road for a long way, traveling through a variety of environments, like from a forest to kind of chaparral with manzanita. And then you come up to the top of a hill. So it's really on the top of a hill, and you're looking down and out, and you see redwoods in the distance, but there's not, whereas at the Taft Garden, you're kind of in this valley tucked in under the oaks. When you're at the Reeds, you're kind of like on this open hilltop. And so they created a completely, whereas John's, the Taft Garden is not at all fenced in. This is completely fenced in, and Mary and Lou is more of the plant collector and plant breeder, and he would start all the plants, and she kind of formulated the design. And so they really wanted, to create this beautiful space, and they weren't necessarily focused on any specific types of plants, but they ended up choosing a lot of drought tolerant plants and some natives in our mix. But really the focus was on the form, the texture, and the color, and creating, throughout the year, it has a completely different feel. And but throughout the year, it also has that same kind of soft layers of texture and color. And that was really Mary's doing in her design work. And it has beautiful light because it's slightly coastal, so it gets this amazing morning fog, as I mentioned before, which is delightful to photograph in.
And you've just gotten out of your sleeping bag, obviously.
Right. It's fun.
And some of our participants may have actually have seen this garden because it was on a Pacific Horticulture event tour a couple of years ago. We did an event up in Santa Rosa and did a self-guided tour, and we went to Hog Hill. And we so look forward to getting back to those as everything starts to reopen, and we're starting all this incredible new programming that Sarah's coming up with. We have not forgotten those wonderful, remember those in-person meetings? Wow, won't those be great? Let's go north. Let's get out of California. It's great to see, and we'll take a little trip up to, I think this is Hood River, Oregon. This is the Columbia River Gorge Garden, another habitat garden that looks like it's a home garden, but it's not really. Jennifer, can you tell us a little bit about this?
Well, this is such a great story. This is, I probably, for every single one I wrote, I was like, this is my favorite. I want to do it just like this. This is the home garden and a community garden of Sheila Ford Richmond up in Hood River, Oregon. And she is a retired art teacher and a grandmother. And she moved into her home in this sort of subdivision. And she knew she wanted to do her garden to create all kinds of habitat for birds. Specifically, that was her starting point for herself, but also to be able to familiarize and not so much educate as introduce her grandson to the joy of a garden that was full of life and birds and bugs and bees. And she knew she wanted to use a lot of natives because she knew that was what was going to be most useful to the wildlife of her area. And she has a great quote in the book, which is something along the lines of, if you are going to invite a native plant to live at your house, then you are going to have to find out what it needs to eat and drink and, you know, what position it wants to live in so that it will be happy there. And she started her home garden, and she consulted with Drew Merritt and Kristen of Humble Roots Nursery. They're a native plant specialty nursery in the Hood, the Columbia River Gorge area. And they do a lot of restorations, a lot of really interesting natives. She consulted with them, and Drew worked with her on coming up with the plant palette for around her house. And as she's doing this, she keeps sort of looking out the corner of her property and seeing this like abandoned, weedy mess of a piece of ground that was, you know, a common area in the neighborhood that wasn't cared for at all and was just sort of left to its own devices, with compacted soil and, you know, a lot of invasive weedy seed taking over. And she was irritated enough by this that she said, you know what, I am going to do something about this now that my home garden is done. And so she kind of rallied her community. And this was another great quote. She's like, if you want to get something done, you need to talk to the grandparents, because the grandparents have a little bit of money and a little bit of time, and grandchildren who they want to create a better world for. And so she got her community together. And again, Drew and Kristen, specifically Drew, consulted and helped her on it, but she also consulted with a local like water resource manager and a wildlife resource manager to specifically choose plants that would be, you know, the larval food source or the migratory bird food or the best nesting plants for that area. And they would work on weekends, they would pull weeds, they would clear, and then it got planted. And now it's this fantastic community native plant habitat garden that just, you know, fills the whole community with connection and life and joy.
That is such a wonderful community story. That is just fantastic. I'd like us to look at one more garden set of photos. And this is, again, talking about wildlife and pollinator plantings, but this is very deceptive even, I think, to look at the photos because it's in a very urban place. So it's this one's really sort of tucked away. It's urban habitat, Amanda Galbraith's garden. And this is in urban Seattle. And it's definitely carving out sort of a quiet space. And I loved the way the gardener the homeowner talked a lot about low maintenance, and I mean, it seems deceptive. It's so beautiful. I'd love to hear from both of you really just about how this idea of limited space and the potential for, even if you just have this corner of the world in an urban place, like having that potential. Caitlin, if you want to start, and then Jennifer. This was really inspiring, I thought.
Yeah, I think it is, especially, even if you don't even own a home. I think the idea that even if you rent, or even if you just have a little parking strip, you can start small. And her garden had been owned by somebody who was in the Forest Service, and he had planted a lot of trees. And so she did a lot of things like leave, this birch that had died up for the birds. But the thing is, even if you just have a little strip, you can start small, and it's actually often the best way to start with seeds. Or you can do something like the previous garden that we were looking at, which is like a community effort. And so I think the idea is sometimes it can be really overwhelming to actually get started, and I think it can be really inspiring to look at larger projects, but the smaller projects are so inspiring and so attainable. And you could just start with a few little seeds, and then also look into if there's something you can do in your community, or if you could start something in your community. If you walk by a park every day and it's derelict and it's run down, maybe there's some way you could actually get involved and work with your community to actually build something in your own neighborhood, or even in just your parking strip. Jennifer?
And I think, one of the things that was really interesting, I think helpful to me to see these gardens, especially because they look so beautiful in the photographs, right? And so you kind of think, oh, that's a lot of work. Like, can I live up to that? And all of these gardens were crafted and created and have been, co-evolved over years. There is not a garden in here that, started last year and all of a sudden looks this great. These are the ongoing dynamic conversations between these people and their every day or every weekend or every season input and care and observation and creative thinking. And we all have that on our, we all have that capacity. And I think that's my greatest hope from this book, is just to see even the little things that people do, as Caitlin was saying, because they can make a big difference. And the joy that these gardeners expressed in the changing colors or the changing forms, like the seed heads or the buds, or even the joy of making compost from the biomass was, it speaks to what brings all of us to a garden. And it also then speaks to what keeps us in those gardens, because it's not for just a pretty picture. It is for that deep embodied joy of co-creating something meaningful in this world.
Yeah, I would just say that, it's about that actual connection with, and the actual connection to the earth itself and to the plants. And it brings you so much joy and peace. And that's where to start.
Oh, this is truly inspiring. We have quite a few questions from our attendees that are here with us this evening. Richard, do you want to go ahead and grab one of those, and maybe we can get a few in before we do our final toasting?
I do. I want to, our first question is from Cyrus Patel, who's a former Pacific Horticulture board member, who I know that Jennifer knows. And he wonders, with a book this gorgeously visual, how did you balance the impact of the text and the photography, even just in how much paper real estate to devote to each? Maybe Jennifer, you want to start with that, and then we'll throw it to Caitlin.
Sure. And I saw the wording on your first question, Cyrus, and because I love you, I'm going to answer that one too, which is yes, of course you worry about the photographs overshadowing the words. I'm no fool. Very few people are going to read 60,000 words, but they're there so that you can go back to them, you know, and find the name of a plant or find the name of a mountain range. And you know, I think this ties back into an earlier question on the cultural history that's involved. Like for me, it was just really important to include the level of information that I wanted people to learn to expect in a garden book, that they should know what their water source is, what their aquifer name is, what their watershed and mountain ranges, and some of that geologic history. They should know, and we should expect to know who were the native peoples on whose land we now live. I think that is like really sort of anteing up our cultural literacy as gardeners so that we aren't working in a vacuum and in isolation and then becoming complicit in damage being done to our world. That in educating ourselves about all of those things, we become better gardeners. And so I have to hope that people will take in the words slowly, kind of like vitamins or you know, like a little good night message, but they will be able to enjoy the beauty of the images all the time, every day. And hopefully the words will make those images even better after you've read them, because you will see the narrative of the image come to life for you. Thank you for that, Cyrus. Good question.
Really nice question. This one is for Caitlin from Bastion, and this is this looks like a masterclass sort of question. I'm wondering how your trained eye is able to separate the mass of the garden into separate forms. Specifically, do you try to find an individual plant to lead the eye into the photograph?
I think it's like any composition, whether you're creating a painting, whether you're creating a photograph, or whether you're actually creating a garden. I think it's about allowing a viewer to enter the space and for your eye to move around an image or through a space, and then also to find a resting spot, because if it's like too chaotic, you can become overwhelmed. So I think it's just about moving through the space visually and then at the same time finding a resting spot. So it's usually not necessarily composing it around a specific plant, but it could be, you know, it's partially light too, and how the light is interacting with the space, but usually I'm focused more on space.
This is great insight into how you work. I'm sure those who are the better photographers among our attendees probably are picking up a lot. I think what we should do is we should begin bringing in some special guests, and maybe we can even, Richard, do you think we can do one more question?
Sure.
While we're bringing some folks in, and I want to do a shout out for Noah Froyo, who from Pacific Horticulture, who tonight is assisting everyone with the chat, and he is bringing some folks in. We do have some special guests who are here because they were featured in the book, which is really exciting, and they'll be coming with us in a moment. Richard, do you have a question that you'd like to pick out for here? I did want to ask this really quick question because I know some folks were interested in Hog Hill's garden and whether that was public.
It is not public. Yeah, I'm not sure. Yes, it is not public, but they do sometimes have it open on tour, so it's a good one to try and just keep your eyes open, and maybe Pacific Horticulture will be able to take another tour back there. And to answer Carol Bornstein's question, so it's Hog Hill that's on the cover, and she also asked what some of the gardens were in the title pages, and for the subsections, and the subsections are really those title pages are really spectacular in my opinion, and they aren't credited. Maybe are they credited in the back, Caitlin?
They might not be, but I can tell you that the Southwest is the
Tano Point.
Tano Point, and then Southern California, I believe, is David Gottschall's garden. If I'm not,
I think it's
I think it's the nature garden.
No, it's the nature garden.
Yeah.
I recognize that one.
Is your video there, Carol?
Yes.
There you
there you
are.
are.
Hi.
Hi. Let me. I need to do something with
bring some more
my little
folks in.
curtain.
Yeah.
It's
And
too-
we'll invite the rest of you to
Yeah,
please.
let's
Yeah.
bring
Please.
everybody
Hold on.
in if we're able.
Looks like Dennis is joining us from the garden. Hi, Dennis.
Yay. And Eddie and Ron.
Eddie's taking us on a walk.
And Evan.
Oh, there's
Marianne,
Eddie.
are you
Wonderful.
going to turn on your...
Hey,
Look,
Ronald.
there's Evan.
Evan.
One of the crazy things about this whole story is that I, as the writer, actually did not get to visit every single garden. So I have not met many of the gardeners that I feel are like my intimate best friends now. But I will one day, all of you.
Oh,
Especially
great.
when you can travel again.
Yeah.
And Kat High is joining us from Topanga. Hi, Kat.
Yay.
Who else do we have here? Jennifer or Caitlin, tell us who these folks are.
Sheila Richmond is on, and Marianne Newcomer.
Oh, yeah, David should be coming on too, but he's not on.
And we just
but
added
There's
Sheila.
Marianne.
Marianne.
Dennis Mudd is in from Southern California. He had the delightful garden outside of, or in San Diego. And Ronald Koo, who has the garden in Northern California in Los Altos Hills.
Oh,
And
nice.
Richmond is the garden that we looked at earlier, the native habitat garden in Hood River.
Hi, Sheila. Beautiful garden. Welcome. Hi, Marianne. I think was Marianne gonna?
Marianne's in Idaho, and her garden and the botanical gardens were both in, and she has done work at the botanical gardens there, and she's in Boise.
Nice.
Wonderful. Well, we just have a few minutes. Is anyone who came on want to give a little toast? I don't know if you have drink in hand.
Oh, well, my toast is a glass of water with lemon in it. So I'm not prepared really with anything fancy, but definitely want to congratulate both of you on this exceptional book. I have visited a lot of the gardens that were featured, not by no means all of them, and I look forward to doing that someday. But for the ones that I knew, your ability to capture the essence of them visually as well as in words was really exceptional. So cheers.
Here's
Great
to
job.
that.
Cheers. Thank you, Carol.
Yeah.
That means a lot coming from you. For anyone who doesn't know, Carol has some fantastic books herself on native plants, and they are worth looking up. And if I just went right over here, I could pull them off the shelf, Carol.
California native
Thank you,
plants for the
Jennifer.
garden.
Yes.
Anyone else have a few words they'd like to share?
Bob Highland sent in a message, and he asked me to read it from he and Andrew. So if you don't mind, I'll go ahead and read that. Is that
Sure.
okay?
Yeah.
Greetings from Portland, Jennifer, Caitlin, and Pacific Horticulture Society. Congratulations on publication day. Andrew and I both know how important and exciting this day is. Full disclosure, Andrew is the publisher for Timber Press. How important and exciting this day is for the birth of a new book. So many good connections on so many levels. Caitlin with her stunning photography, Jennifer with her golden writing and fostering of cultivating place, Andrew as publisher of Timber Press, and me as longtime public and private garden advocate. We're both honored and tickled green to be included. Harborton Hill has been our joy for these past 10 years, a private refuge, and more importantly, a melting pot to connect plants and people. Thank you all. My glass is raised in high praise of Under Western Skies.
Cheers to
Thank
that.
you,
Oh,
Bob.
cheers. That was lovely. This has been so thrilling. Is there anyone else who's joined us who want to say anything to Caitlin and Jennifer? We just have a couple more minutes.
I just want to say thank you for including Red Butte Garden. The pictures are beautiful and really captures the garden. Thank you so much, and congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wait, so David at Terramoda is here in case we could ask him to be a panelist.
Noah, can you find David?
Oh, I found him. Here we go.
Oh.
It might just take a second here.
No worries.
Joining us from
And
Echo
Kat,
Park.
Yep. And Kat High, I think, had something she wanted to say.
Yes, Kat.
Yung Limalyo, hi friends, hi everybody. I am just really thrilled that Caitlin and Jennifer included my humble little garden in this amazing book. But my garden is what we call a gathering garden. And behind me, you can see some of my friends and neighbors who have come to gather from my garden. We believe in interacting with the beauty and the bounty that nature gives us. So if you haven't seen it, KCET did a documentary called Tending the Wild. Yeah. And it is how we interact and care for this land. So join us.
Thank you, Kat.
And David is here. Can you hear us, David? It looks like he's out in the garden.
Sorry.
He's outside.
Am I cutting in and out? Oh, can you hear me okay?
We got
Yes,
you now.
we hear you now. Yes.
Okay, great. Hi. Thank you, everybody. Timber Press and Caitlin and Jennifer. It was a lovely talk, and I don't have much to add because so many elegant, important things were stated. I guess all I would like to say is that thank you for including my home garden, and I really think that what you're doing is so important in terms of like repositioning gardening as this this ecologically, or to a degree, this ecologically driven like passion amongst all of us kind of like West Coasters. And I think that that's really important. And so your book is actually, I'm going to think, have like this tremendous legacy in terms of speaking to reorienting like garden making practices and traditions. And I guess the only other thing that I'd like to say is as I went through the book, in so many ways, it's like it really champions modesty and like living within our means. And I think that's so important. I think we live at this very unique, fraught time. And I think showcasing the fact that gardens can be both modest and ravishingly beautiful simultaneously is like such a wonderful, exemplary thing to show to like the greater public. And so to that end, I think your book is going to speak volumes to the greater public and to everyone who kind of comes in contact with it. So to that end, thank you for all the work you put in.
Well,
I think we should all raise our glass to that statement.
That was
Very
an absolutely lovely, lovely point.
Thank you, David.
Cheers. Yeah, thank you. Cheers.
And I think that's really, I think we're going to leave that as our ending statement, other than to thank Jennifer Jewell and Caitlin Atkinson for sharing their book with us, and now sharing it with the world because it is released officially.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone,
Beautiful,
for being
work.
here. Thank you, Dennis.
And also just a reminder that there's lots of great new things happening with the new Pacific Horticulture, and check out our website, pacifichorticulture.org, for some great new programming that's coming online that Sarah's been working on. So lots to come.
Many other people too.
And many other people, very
excited to share with you all. Many things coming soon.
And this is such a great kickoff too. Congratulations, you guys. Such a good book.
Thank you, Pacific Horticulture. Appreciate it. Really nice forum.
Thank you, Pacific Horticulture.
We'll see you all in the garden.
So
Those are awesome.
We'll see you in the garden. Oh, can't wait to see you all out in the garden for real too. It'll happen.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Have a great evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining.